All right, everyone, who's ready for the first real session? All right, let's do this. So, what is the cloud? We're about to, if anyone here were a businessman, I'd say we're going to blow your mind because business people always think the cloud is magic. We're about to dispel that magic, but yeah, there is no magic. I'm sorry, kids. So, first we're going to dispel the magic. Then we're going to talk about things like operational costs, about geography, doing infrastructure as a service, service layers, and popular services, right? Basically, this is just meant to be a high-level overview. Wait, I allocated 1 hour for this? Okay. So we'll kind of give you a general idea of what the cloud is, why it was made, why we use it, how we can use it, all that sort of good stuff. Any questions about the agenda? Excellent. Here we go. Also, I haven't done many actual presentation sessions. I've just done like intro and discussion stuff. So if you guys are not familiar, because I think not a lot of you have attended CodeSeoul stuff outside of this bootcamp. But when I ask if there are questions, I wait for an uncomfortably long amount of time. And that's intentional because people need a second to think of the question. Then they need a moment to kind of summon the courage to ask the question, and then they need to actually say it. So when I ask if there's a question, I'm going to wait a long time. It is going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have to deal with it. All right? Great. So as usual, the expectations. I'm not 100% expert. I've been using cloud stuff since, oh shit, a bunch of years, basically. Just under a decade, I think. Let's not tell people how old I am, but yeah. So, like I've done on-premise stuff, I've done cloud stuff. We at one company, you could argue we built our own virtual private cloud. But yeah, so hopefully I'm in a good position to tell you about this stuff, and it's all conceptual anyway. So I don't know how we could necessarily get stuff wrong, but let's see. So, dispelling the magic. It is not magic. There's kind of a meme among infrastructure engineers on the internet. When people are like, what is the cloud? It's just someone else's computer. Like, no, that's literally it. When you're like, oh, I'm using the AWS cloud. It's like, okay, you're using AWS servers. Congratulations. So the cloud delivers computing services over the internet. You do not have to worry about the physical server yourself. That is the whole purpose of the cloud. The reason this was a big deal is because back in the olden days, if you wanted to run a server, you had to find a data center, or you had to build a data center. Then you had to install racks in that data center. You had to get power into that data center. You had to get internet network line in and out of that data center. You had to figure out how to cool the data center. You had to figure out how to do power distribution within that data center because some racks may use more power or less power. You had to figure out how to do temperature management. You had to figure out how to do things like fire security, physical human security, all this kind of stuff. And guess what? That shit's expensive. And people did not want to do that. If you're like a cell phone insurance company, like the first company I worked at, do you think they want to run a data center? Hell no. They don't want to run a data center. They're just like, give me a computer so I can like do stuff with my customers. They don't really care about the technology. So the cloud was revolutionary, and that all these businesses where technology is not their main focus have to worry a lot less about technology now. That's why it's a big deal. And that's why everyone went to the cloud. But basically, the cloud just delivers computing services over the internet. So you can get servers as virtual machines. You can get storage like this storage as like Amazon S3 or Azure Blob Storage or Google Cloud Storage, right? They provide managed databases for you if you don't want to manage your database itself, if you don't want to manage a database yourself, because that does suck. Databases are complicated. The networking, it's all software-defined networking. You don't have to do all the cabling and stuff yourself. If you guys want to have a fun time on the internet, you can search for different cabling methods. and you can see all sorts of like internet flame wars. It's great. Different people have different methods of like doing server cabling and all this. You can see wire hell, and then you can see like properly configured data centers, all this kind of stuff. And especially these days, a lot of cloud services offer software as well. So you'll see, especially in recent times, you'll see a lot of like managed machine learning systems, where it's like just upload your Jupyter notebook and we'll build the model for you. I don't like that shit. But all the cloud is basically someone's handling the technology for you. You just pay them money. They give you technology. GG easy. Okay, does that make sense so far? Cool. Huh? Did you have a? Okay. So some misconceptions. Is the cloud everywhere? Are there like computers floating in the clouds? No, buoyancy doesn't work that way. The cloud has just hosted a bunch of physical data centers throughout the world. For example, there's like what is it? So if you go over to like Yeoksam, so you have like Yeoksam Station, right? You have Seollal Station, and then you have that intersection between, right? At that intersection between, there's like the Shilla Hotel. Right next to that, there's a KT data center, right? You can go physically visit data centers. They won't let you in, thankfully, because that's a giant security risk. But all this cloud stuff, it's just in data centers throughout, right? So there's a bunch of data centers in Seoul. Chuncheon actually has a data center for Oracle, but good luck actually getting server space over there. It's full and they haven't bothered to expand it. I've been trying for like 6 months. But yeah, the cloud is just someone else's server in some data center that someone else is paying the cost of managing. Other misconceptions. Is the cloud infinite? Well, given what you just learned, is physical space infinite? No, right? So the cloud is not infinite. Now, they make it seem infinite because they're super smart and they actually invest in capacity management. In past companies that I worked at that managed their own data centers, they did not have proper capacity management. So they'd run out of server space and server capacity, and then they'd just start panicking. But these cloud companies, their specialty is making sure that they never run out of capacity for you. So to you, it is seemingly infinite. However, in reality, it's not. Who knows what an H100 GPU is? Oh, I could teach you something. Okay, great. So if you get into machine learning stuff, especially for LLMs, large language models, the big hot thing right now is the H100 GPU. It is the biggest, the baddest GPU, graphics processing unit, also used for machine learning stuff. One of those things goes for like $10,000 minimum, right? And one of the reasons for this is, yes, it's production costs, but it's also the limited availability. Building these things is time and resource intensive. So there's only so many of these. And this whole cloud not being infinite, if you try to reserve a bunch of virtual machines with H100 instances attached, you learn real quick how not infinite the cloud is, because the data centers will run out of H100 instances if you try to reserve too many, because there just aren't that many physically in the world, and there's even less at whatever data center you're trying to reserve them in. So the cloud is not infinite, but chances are, unless you're working at like a big giant machine learning company or like somewhere like Kakao or something like that, although Kakao manages their own data center, so maybe it's not too much of a thing, you probably won't run into issues. It will probably seem infinite to you, and that's good enough. So does that all make sense so far? So where is the cloud? In a physical data center somewhere, yeah. And that's pretty much it, okay? So operational cost. So I talked earlier about companies not wanting to manage their own data centers, right? But the problem is if you're paying someone else to do it, doesn't that cost more money? Because, you know, they're trying to make money off of their service, so they're trying to make a product in addition to the cost of managing the data center, right? But the thing is, if your specialty is not data centers, you're probably not doing it very efficiently. And so if you were trying to manage a data center yourself at the level of quality that Microsoft or Amazon or Google is, you're just not going to be able to do it as effectively as they will, right? Now, would it still cost less than you paying them? Not sure. That's something you as a business have to figure out. But most businesses have decided it's not worth the operational cost. It's not worth the HR cost of like hiring engineers, of dealing with corporate culture, dealing with the corporate org chart, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, let's just pay someone else to do it, okay? In terms of how you pay for cloud services, it's mostly a pay-as-you-go model, okay? Basically, you reserve resources and use resources, compute resources, storage resources, network, whatever. And then basically, you accrue costs over time, and at the end of the month, you pay them a bunch of money, and you cry because your wallet is empty. Okay, but the thing is, the costs are actually very predictable, especially if you don't have auto-scaling stuff. Okay, so you can actually do very, very fine-tuned cost management with cloud things. Whereas if you're managing your own data center, what if the cost of electricity goes up? Well, if the cost of electricity goes up like 10%, well, your data center cost just went up 10% or something like that, right? Now, this kind of stuff may happen with cloud services too, but they act as a buffer, right? To try, because they have some amount of profit and their operating margin will fluctuate, right? But they're not going to adjust the cost of it. They're just going to absorb that fluctuation as either additional cost or as additional profit, right? So your cost with the cloud provider, that's going to be much more consistent. And that's very helpful for your company's finance team because they like predictability. That allows them to do less work. But the other thing is that the cost scales with usage, right? If you're managing your own data center, let's say that for 1 hour of the day, you have 100,000 users, which is actually not that big, but let's imagine it is. Let's say, screw it. Let's say you have 10 million users for 1 hour of the day, okay? And then for the rest of the day, you have 10,000, right? You still need enough servers to support those 10 million users, right? But for the rest of the day, you're not even using 1% of those servers, right? So you're just burning money, right? All those extra servers that you're using for that 1 hour of the day to serve your customers, they're useful during that 1 hour, but beyond that, they're just a giant money sink, okay? That's another benefit of the cloud. If you scale up to serve a bunch of users, you can scale back down when you're done serving those users and save a bunch of money. The cloud provider absorbs that cost, okay? It also reduces hardware maintenance. So for example, at Lunit, we have our own data center in addition to cloud things, or not our own data center. We rent space at a data center. And sometimes we have to send our infrastructure guys over there to replace a hard drive. And that sucks. That's expensive because that's taking time away from other work they could be doing. We have to go buy the hard drive. We may have downtime waiting for that hard drive to arrive, all this kind of stuff, right? So that's an additional maintenance expense in terms of both cost for the company, in terms of like needing to buy a new hard drive, and opportunity cost, because that engineer could be doing other work, right? So these are a lot of the benefits of using a cloud system because you don't have to worry about any of that shit. You're just like, here's some money for the commute that I need when I need it. And when I don't need it, I ain't paying you shit, right? Very efficient. It's predictable if you need it to be, and it's scalable when you need it to be, okay? However, as I mentioned in the kind of intro session today, if you're not paying attention, you could spend a lot of money. So for those who weren't here when we were talking about that, back when I was in LA and was part of a group similar to CodeSeoul, I did a session on infrastructure. I was like, okay, I'll just spin up like 30 virtual machines and I'll, distribute keys so that everyone can log into those servers and, we can go through the workshop. And then when the workshop's over, I can tear down all the servers. 30 servers for just like an hour or two. It might cost me like 100 or 200 bucks, whatever. It's fine. I can handle that. I've got to turn these off for 1 month. And one Saturday morning, which was a weird thing, I woke up to a phone call, and it was Amazon being like, yo, where's our money? And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And they're like, yeah, you've been running 30 servers for 1 month, or maybe it was more than a month. I don't entirely remember. They're like, you owe us $4,000. I'm like, okay. Now, in hindsight, I could have actually debated that. I could have been like, hey, I did this with a nonprofit. They weren't used for the rest of that time. Like, can we negotiate? I should have done that, and you can do that. But I didn't know any better, so I just forked over $4,000. So that was an expensive mistake. Don't make that mistake. I was very lucky that I happened to have $4,000 at that point in time, because like a week before that, I didn't. So yeah, do be careful with cost. Do manage cost. There's a reason I showed that cost page in the intro session. Anytime you do cloud stuff, keep an eye on the money. Otherwise, you can go bankrupt real quick. And that's true of whether you're doing it alone by yourself or with like a startup or whatever else. So there have been stories of like interns at companies just accidentally spending $100,000 and the company's like, oh shit, right? So pay attention to things. Okay. Any questions about the cost side? Yes. Yes, but okay. So the question was, I was trying to find a mic for you. The question was, actually, is this mic even working? Oh, glad I've been loud. Can you hear? Whoa. Can you hear me now? Hello, hello. Whatever. I'll just be loud anyway. The question was, can you set a budget? You can set budget alerts, but as I'm aware, yeah, as far as I know, and you may want to double check me on this, I'm not super confident about it, but as far as I know, you cannot tell the cloud provider like, hey, once I hit this cost, like shut off my servers. I don't think they do that. Mostly because, delivery of service is generally considered more important than cost, right? Because maybe you can lose some money 1 quarter, but you can get it back the next quarter, right? But if you lose your users 1 quarter, you might not be able to get those users back. So usually delivery of service is considered a higher priority than cost. So I don't think you can force it to stop or destroy your resources on the cloud. But I would double check that. I'm not 100% confident on it. However, what I know you, oh, yes, go ahead.
Most of the clouds, they don't have actually a budget limit, so you can just use as much as you want. But most of the clouds has different security measures about like not having $1 million cost. So most of the cloud providers, when you create a new account, you cannot open a GPU with a $1,000 per hour rate. For example, in AWS, if you have more than 5 virtual machines, approximately like around $1,000 per month at the first day, they will call you and say, hey, you open up 5 different EC2 machines, and this will cost you a couple of $1,000s. And they just like ask you to confirm on the phone that if this is intentionally. And also, like someone, for example, in AWS, you cannot have a virtual machine more than 100 gigabytes of memory when you open your account, because you have to say them, hey, I will do some big business with that. Please give me an increase of quota. So they, for the new accounts, they have some kind of quotas. If your account is like more than $5,000 in first month, they usually call you middle of the month and confirm you that it's free or not.
Thank you, Amber. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So also on Google Cloud, they have default quotas for all the various services. and you have to submit a request to increase that quota, which is basically the same idea. They prevent you from spending too much money before you've kind of proven that you can spend that much money. But additionally, all of the different cloud providers, they do allow you to set budgets for alerts. So you can set a budget, say, hey, if I spend more than this on this type of resource or more than this on the whole thing, send me an alert. So I have that on my AWS account. I have, hey, if I spend more than $0, send me an alert, right? Because if I do something on my personal AWS account, like I know I'm doing it and I know I'm doing it for a short time, I don't want to pay that $4,000 again. So yeah, definitely make use of those budget alerts. But to Emida's point, many of these systems have quotas that if you need to exceed them, you need to actually contact the cloud provider directly and ask them to lift the quota. And that's how they protect both you and them from costs that may not be able to be paid. But yeah, any other questions? Awesome. All right, so we talked about cloud providers or cloud systems being in physical data centers. Where are these data centers? Lots of places. So also, I was very curious about this. So I didn't prepare these slides. Dennis prepared these slides, which is why they're so good. He's great at preparing slides. But this datacenter.rs, RS is actually Republic of Serbia. So that was cool. I didn't know that until I checked it out last night. But this site will show you a map of all the different data centers throughout the world. You can scan that QR code too if you'd like. But like I said, there are a bunch here in Seoul. There's a couple down in Chuncheon. I believe there's a few in Busan as well. And then, you have a bunch in Japan, you have a bunch in China, but you can't necessarily use the ones in China without having some agreement with the Chinese government, all that kind of stuff. So Singapore is also a big hotspot for data centers. But yeah, they're all over the place. And this, oh, he put notes. I should pay attention to those. There's also, there's a reason for all this geography, because light only travels so fast. And light is pretty fast, but the Earth is pretty big. So, for example, who's used meetup.com? Who's noticed it's painfully slow? Yeah. Guess where their servers are? Yeah. Not in Asia. Cheap bastards. I'm sorry. I'm getting salty about meetup. But yeah, that's a lot of that is just waiting for the light to travel from the US to Korea. Okay. So location matters. When you sign up with these cloud services, they'll often have you scope your resources to a region. Okay, so when you request a server, you don't just say, give me a server. You say, give me a server in Seoul, or give me a server in Europe, or give me a server in the US, or more specifically, in this region of the US because the US is huge. That kind of stuff, okay? Additionally, who has heard of disaster recovery from an IT perspective? 1, 2, well, obviously, Emma. 3, okay, pretty good. So many businesses have this kind of business continuity plan where it's like, what if South Korea gets nuked, right? I know that's a terrifying thought, but, I'm absolutely sure that even a company like Samsung has some kind of plan for the business to continue, even if Korea just disappears from the map, right? Or if, your main data center is in LA and an earthquake just wrecks LA, the business needs to continue, right? Or if your main data center is in Singapore and a tsunami just floods the hell out of Singapore, the business needs to continue, right? So from an IT perspective, we have this idea of disaster recovery, where, and this is only true of like larger businesses, where they'll actually host their IT resources in multiple locations, and they'll have some kind of mirroring between them to share data, so that if suddenly one of those regions is just gone, or it doesn't even have to be the whole region, it could just be the data center in that region. If something happens to that data center in that region, then the whole system can fail over to the other region and the business can continue its work. Okay. So that is very, very common among cloud systems and very important to be aware of. If you're at a smaller business, you probably don't need to worry about that. But if you're at a larger business, especially serving global customers, that is critically important. Most businesses will have some kind of business continuity plan, which will include an IT disaster recovery plan. And then there are data sovereignty laws when it comes to data transfer. Did you know that if you're sending any data across the borders of the US government has it? Congratulations, data privacy. Woo! So that is something to consider. Some countries have certain data sovereignty laws. Or who has seen in Korea when you sign up for a service and a message pops up and it says, do you agree for your data to be sent overseas? Who's seen that? Okay, at least one person's been paying attention. In Korea, there is a law where if you as an IT service provider are going to store data on Korean citizens outside of Korea, you must obtain Korean citizens' consent. Also, be aware of that if any of you are building online services. And so that's a data sovereignty law that you have to be aware of, right? So this is very important when it comes to cloud providers, because when you select regions, you have to consider the legal ramifications of doing your compute operations in that region, okay? You also have things like GDPR for Europe. Australia also has quite strict data privacy laws. These are things you have to be aware of and you have to consider, okay? And then, as I mentioned earlier, light only travels so fast. So it's a good idea to situate your services close to where your customers are. If most of your users are in Korea, does it make sense to put your servers in the US? Maybe not. US data centers tend to be cheaper, but will your users be comfortable dealing with an extra 3 or 4 seconds of delay? Maybe not. So these are things you need to check and consider. Any questions about the geography side of things? Yes.
Like those some theories about like in specific areas because of the content political issues or I don't know what because can you repeat?
Just the core part of your question.
I mean, I want to know how do they choose some kind of geography in order to place the center, not only because of the speed, but because of the politics, or because of the outside know the country.
Yeah.
Calculated correctly.
Yeah, so it's a good question. And usually most businesses will start in their local country because they're familiar with the laws there. And then they'll expand to places where it's easiest, right? So I've heard of, so I've done a lot of like global scale IT stuff, but I haven't been the one to actually do new IT stuff in a new market and doing all the policy stuff. So a little of what I'm going to tell you is hearsay. So you may want to check some stuff online and confirm. But from people I've talked to who have done that specific work, it's usually you consider the size of the target population and the ease of doing business there, right? So if you want to, what I remember someone telling me is they wanted to have very, very low regulatory environment and not have to worry a lot about like, you know, data privacy and all this kind of stuff, but they wanted a large population to work with, so they released in India, right? Or they wanted to, you know, kind of have like a balanced layer of like privacy stuff, so they released in some regions in Latin America, this kind of stuff. You absolutely have to consider the kind of legal and regulatory environment of where you're deploying. As for which region specifically, I can't really say because I haven't really done that work, but I'm absolutely sure there are resources online to help you figure out where you want to release. But usually what I've seen countries or companies do is they'll operate in their home country first because that's where they're familiar with, and then they'll start exploring other options. Usually they'll go with smaller markets, because if it's a small market and you mess something up, chances are the cost or the difficulty is not going to be too huge. So I know for mobile games, a lot of mobile game developers start in New Zealand because it's at least a lot of US mobile game developers start in New Zealand for their first release of their product because it's a small population. So if they mess it up, they're not going to lose too many users. It's English speaking. And a lot of the laws are kind of similar to other English speaking countries, especially like Australia. So there's a bunch of different factors to consider.
What about tax payments?
Tax payments?
Okay.
I don't do finance stuff, man. I'm sorry. I don't have a good answer for you on that. Yeah. Can you pass him the mic?
So are there, the content delivery networks are in multiple countries. So what are the regulations regarding content delivery networks?
Ooh, good question. So stuff is a little bit tricky because there's no global entity managing the internet, right? So if someone in China accesses your website, but you're not targeting Chinese users, can you be held liable for what you have on your website by China? And that gets a little bit questionable, right? It's for content delivery networks, usually you choose what regions you deploy to. So there's still this item of choosing regions, but you can choose a plan where it's just deployed everywhere. And in that case, yes, it gets questionable. Personally, I haven't run into an issue where I've needed to worry about it too much. But for the services that I've deployed myself, I've only ever needed to do like multi-region stuff. So like, Korea, Japan, or East Asia, right? And beyond that, I haven't needed to worry about it so much. That one might be low on battery. Here, let's get you another one.
No, it's working. Oh. So say your content delivery network is run by a company that's in the US, but you specify, I want my service to be in India. Then are you bound by both countries' laws?
Good question. To be clear, I am not a lawyer. I am. This is not legal advice. Please do not sue me if I give you bad advice. As I understand, the content delivery network would be responsible for the US side of things because they would be a US business providing a service to other countries, right? So you would not be liable on that side of things because they are the ones providing you the service. But in terms of India, if you are explicitly targeting customers in India, if you were doing business in India, you would be liable for the business that you run there. That is my understanding of it. But consult a lawyer for these things. But at my level of understanding, that is accurate as far as I'm aware. Does that answer your question, or? Yeah. Now, that's also assuming you have a legal entity in India, right? Because if you don't have a legal entity in India, then you're getting into like international lawsuits, and those are really hard, right? They're only actually going to come after you if A, they think you're a big enough problem to merit that amount of effort, and B, if they think they can either actually hurt you or get something out of you, right? So if you're like a small or medium business and like you mess up some stuff with their data privacy laws or whatever, but you've only ever had like 100,000 users, they'll just be like, hey, stop that, please. Or maybe they'll block your website or something. Like, it's not going to be that big of a deal. I think. Again, I am not a lawyer. Do check legal things, especially when doing international business. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Cool. All right. Other questions? All right. Let's go onward. So, infrastructure as a service. This is a cloud provider, right? They are providing the infrastructure in terms of compute, which would be virtual machines or whatever, in terms of networking, all this kind of stuff. This is the infrastructure they are providing, and they're providing it to you as a service in that you have to do no or minimal configuration in order to use it, okay? So for a virtual machine, you don't have to get onto their virtual machine host, configure the ESX configurations to set up your operating system environment. Like, no, you just say, AWS, give me an Ubuntu Linux machine with these specs, make it happen, and then their systems build all that for you, okay? That is infrastructure as a service, okay? Also with the network layer, right? You're not going to an Amazon Web Services data center and like plugging in the router to get the routes that you want, right? Also, they would not let you do that for a number of reasons. But they provide interfaces for you to define virtual networks, to define virtual firewalls, all this kind of stuff, to configure the infrastructure as you want it, right? So they're just providing it to you as a service rather than you needing to manage stuff yourself. This is the whole premise of a cloud. If someone says, oh, it's infrastructure as a service, okay, it's a cloud. Like, congratulations. Or if someone's like, oh, it's cloud, it's like, it's just infrastructure, and they're just selling it to you. Congratulations. Like, it's not rocket science, it's not crazy stuff, it's just pretty basic. Now, granted, there is rocket science in making it so that infrastructure can be provided as a service. Like setting up these virtual networks and these virtual firewalls, like that's not easy, right? They put a lot of work into these systems to make them work as reliably and effectively as they do. But in terms of the concept is quite simple. So does that make sense? I mean, everything we've been talking about is infrastructure as a service at this point, so this part's less interesting. But another thing is service layers. And this is where stuff starts to get a little bit interesting, okay? So you have infrastructure as a service, right? So that's your compute, that's your network, that's your storage, right? Your kind of base level features, right? And then I'm not 100% sure I agree with this image. Yeah, no, this image sucks. Well, it doesn't suck, but I'm going to describe it slightly differently from this image. So never mind. This image is using a different perspective than what I had intended, but we'll talk about both perspectives. So you have this idea of infrastructure as a service, which that's like all your compute stuff, right? And then you have this idea of platform as a service, right? So platform as a service would be something like, no, I wouldn't say that. I actually, you know what I get? No, I wouldn't call AWS, GCP, or Azure platform as a service. I mean, well, yeah.
Some products, yes, some products, right. So when I'm explaining this, infra as a service is you are actually renting a physical space from a data center, and then you are just putting your servers in it. So what the providers gives you is the infrastructure. And platform as a service, you are renting a virtual machine, like you are renting an EC2. You say that, hey, give me 5 Linux devices, and they give you 5 Linux Ubuntu machines that you can run on your platform. And also, there is a software as a service. For example, you also need a database, right? What you can do, you can just purchase a physical equipment, go somewhere, put the physical equipment, run an operating system in it, run a database in it, and they use it. If you go with this approach is infrastructure as a service. But if you rent a Linux Ubuntu machine from a data center, and if you put a database in it manually and run it, it is platform as a service. But if you go a cloud provider and say, hey, I don't care about what type of physical machine you use, I don't care what type of CPU you use, I don't care what type of software you use, just give me a MySQL DB password, username, and IP address, and I will use it. And this is a software as a service.
Thank you.
a good idea.
So does that make sense for that perspective of service layers? Okay, there's another idea of service layers, which was kind of what I was intending when I read out the skeleton, but this is still very valuable for you guys to understand. So now that you've got this one, another way to look at it is within a cloud service provider, you have these different kind of tiers of services where you have the base layer infrastructure, like I said, compute network, that kind of stuff. And then you have layers above that, which are like containers as a service, right? Or a database as a service, right? Where it's a little bit more managed infrastructure, right? And then you have a layer on top of that, which is like, you know, a web app as a service, right? Or a whole Kubernetes cluster as a service, right? And that's kind of a layer step up. And then you have a layer on top of that of like, hey, here's machine learning as a service, or here's a customer service call center as a service, or here's an Internet of Things as a service, right? So these cloud providers have done this really interesting thing where they started with just giving you basic compute. And then they basically added more and more automation on top of that to where if you're a business that's not focused on technology, you can just be like, hey, I don't want to run my own call center. Amazon, give me a call center. This kind of thing, okay? And it's actually a very genius business model where you start with the basic foundations and then you provide more and more services just using the layers from below. But it's also wildly effective. However, the thing to be aware of is that the farther you go up this stack of services, the more expensive it becomes and the less control you have. But it's also way less management. So you have to kind of balance these things. So does that make sense? Cool. So any questions about service layers in terms of this pyramid here versus like the tiers of services that a cloud provider provides? Any questions about either of these two areas? It's on. It's off. And you guys are too young to get that reference. Okay, I'll stop now. All right, so moving on. So what are some popular services that cloud providers? Yeah, this is why I need to be more specific in things. So there are, no, that's right. Yeah, that's going to be covered later. So there's a bunch of different cloud providers out there. The big three are Amazon, Azure, and Google Cloud. Okay, those are the big three cloud providers. Okay, most companies will be using one of these three. Is that the best decision? Maybe not. These three are quite expensive. Azure is usually considered the cheapest, mostly because Azure gives a lot of startups a lot of benefits. Because Microsoft is pursuing the model of like, hey, if we give a bunch of free resources to a bunch of startups, and one of them becomes a unicorn and continues using us, we win the game, right? So Microsoft is basically playing the numbers game. Whereas Google and AWS, they're kind of premium. They offer all the same stuff, but they act as more premium services and they try to provide better support, better systems. So AWS's big selling point is its very large number of users, which means more support, more online resources to learn how to use AWS for troubleshooting, all that kind of stuff, and their customer service. AWS customer service is spectacular. It is like normally, like, you know, I've learned a bunch of stuff through my career, and every once in a while when I get stuck, I'll reach out to the support of some provider, and usually they're just useless. But when it comes to AWS, like they teach me stuff and I'm like, oh, this is good. I like this. So AWS support is like top tier, man. Like 100% recommend, 5 out of 5 stars, all that kind of good stuff. Google support, less, let's say. Also Google support, I just find their systems just a little bit more difficult to use. But Google provides a lot of interesting technology because, you know, Google was primarily a software company from the beginning, whereas Amazon was originally a bookstore, right? So a little bit of different origin. Now, granted, Amazon has clearly become a software company since then, but Google's focus is really on the cutting edge of technology. So if you're trying to look for like new, like, so the MapReduce algorithm or something like that, when that was big and new, Google was like, yo, we got this kind of stuff, right? They're always kind of on the cutting edge of things. So that's Google's big selling point. And then Azure is like, yo, we're Microsoft and we're cheap. Yeah, you need Windows, you're coming to us, right? Or you're a startup, come to us. We'll give you a bunch of free or cheap stuff, this kind of stuff. Okay, so that's kind of, now also, to be clear, this is my personal opinion, okay? Please do not sue me. Please do not invoke the Korea anti-defamation law, all that kind of good stuff. But yeah, these are the big three. But there's a bunch of other cloud services that are still worth talking about. So there's Alibaba Cloud, if you're cool with China stuff. There's IBM Cloud, if you want to go with old reliable, right? There's also Oracle Cloud, if you want to go dirt cheap. CodeSeoul, we're actually trying to use Oracle Cloud. I mentioned earlier that Chuncheon data center. Yeah, like every once in a while, I just set up my script to try to reserve servers in Chuncheon on Oracle, because it's like you can get 4 servers for free, like unlimited. Well, 4 servers of a certain spec you can have on Oracle for free with no limit. And so I was like, yeah, let me do that. And the problem is they don't have capacity because they're super cheap. Don't look up Oracle's boat races. But those are some smaller ones that are emerging. There's also Linode, Linode. I don't know. They're one that's become kind of big. They're actually backed by Akamai, one of the big cloud delivery or content delivery networks. Are we on time? Oh, we're almost out of time. Oh crap. Oh, we're almost done anyway. Yeah, it's okay.
Network will be, I think, less than 1 hour, so you can.
Okay. I mean, we're almost done anyway. And then there's also like the Korea providers. There is Naver Cloud, which is not bad. They actually have a Terraform provider, which is pretty well designed from what I saw. Haven't used it, but it seems workable. But there's a whole bunch of different smaller cloud providers. If you want to save costs, the smaller ones tend to be cheaper. However, because they're smaller, there's usually less support. There's a smaller community, fewer people using it. So if you're looking for online support, it's a bit more of a challenge. But if you want to pinch every penny, if you want to get the most value out of your money, smaller providers might be better. Okay. Any questions about the different cloud providers? Yes. Don't know. That is a great question. Let's check. Oh my God, I cannot type for cloud provider. Beyond the cloud, kakaocloud.com/service. That looks like it. Let's.
I wonder about how.
Oh.
It's like Kakao Talk, or it's actually.
No, configuring various cloud environments. Containers, storage, data store, analytics, hybrid cloud, AI, networking, compute. Yeah. What's that? Oh, you need residency to use it? Maybe. Gotcha. Samsung has a cloud. What? No shit. So they're saying, for the benefit of the stream, in the back they're saying that if you want to use Naver or Kakao Cloud, you might need Korea residency. Like you might need an alien registration card. So you may want to check on that. But Kakao Cloud, or sorry, Samsung Cloud, wait, hold up. Cloud provider. But Kakao Cloud, cloud platform, there we go. Get out of here. Thank you for the block button. Yeah, Samsung Cloud supposedly is more global. Look at all that. Cool. I didn't even know about these. Great. Thank you, guys. But yeah, there's a bunch of cloud providers out there. As for the smaller ones, I cannot speak as to the quality, but you can definitely look into them. So yeah, does that answer your question then?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. Whichever one is willing to give you the most stuff for free. So it might be Azure. I don't know. There is no necessarily best. It's kind of figure out, like, if your team is all Koreans, it might be better to go with one of the Korean cloud providers. Or actually, no, because even the big cloud providers, they have documentation in Korean, and usually the Korean documentation is also quite good. So it's difficult to say what is best. It depends on what are your cost needs, how much IT expertise do you have, can you cut a deal with any of the providers, who's your target audience? Because I don't think Naver has data centers outside of Korea, for example. So there's a whole bunch of factors to consider. Without knowing your specific case, it's hard to say which one is best. And even then, best is going to be very largely subjective. So yeah. Other questions? All right. So in conclusion, oh my God, the marketing is real. Cloud computing, a catalyst for innovation. Man, this is, yeah, I made a joke about wanting to hire Dennis to do my slides. Like, maybe it shouldn't be a joke. He's good at this stuff. Anyway, the key drivers of why you would want to use the cloud are flexibility, right? You don't have to do your own capacity management. It is, for most of your purposes, it will be seemingly infinite, even if not actually. Scalability, on that note too, again, being able to scale in and out. But the big thing is cost efficiency and cost predictability. If you have the IT expertise and that IT expertise is cheap enough, you could theoretically save money by running your own data center if your traffic is consistent. But if you have very bursty traffic, or if your expertise is not in data center management, then it could be much more cost effective to use a cloud provider. And you can also like very much kind of optimize your cloud provider cost as well. So for example, if you know that you can set up auto scaling stuff where you can say, hey, if I'm only getting so many requests, scale down to one server. And then if my request rate goes up beyond some threshold, scale up, all this kind of stuff. And you can use that to manage costs while still delivering a high quality service. So cloud is very much the way to go. In terms of like ease of management, unless you're a very big company with very good IT resources and you're sure that you can optimize your compute very effectively, then it would make sense to do on-premise, but otherwise cloud is the way to go. And also, like, where the hell else are you going to get a server? Right? You're not going to like go online and buy like a Dell rack server and then go to a data center and like rack it yourself, right? Or maybe you will, I don't know. If you can do that, that's cool. But yeah. So any questions about what is cloud and cloud services at a high level? Awesome. Well, thank you guys. I hope this was helpful. I hope this was informative. We're gonna break for this one. We're gonna take a break for 3 minutes before starting the next session on networking. Oh man, oh that's gonna be fun. Okay, so yeah, see you guys in 3 minutes. Thank you.